Morning, everyone, and thanks for joining a rather early-ish session. Delighted to be moderating on behalf of the Ministry of Investment of Saudi Arabia. We are delighted today to have with us two distinguished panelists. Just to my left, Majid Mufti is the CEO of NEOM Investment Fund, and we'll come to that in a moment on all the exciting things that are happening in NEOM. And Fahad Alhashim is Assistant Deputy Minister at the Ministry of Investment for Strategic Investments. I probably got that wrong, or Investment Development in Saudi Arabia.
Made my title look much better. I appreciate
Thank you for that.
I really do.
And yours truly looks after PwC in the Middle East, and so I'll be your moderator. I think we're probably going to have time for some questions towards the end. So get those ready. Let me set the stage before we jump into some questions. I think what's happening in Saudi Arabia is actually quite unique around the world. The scale of the ambition, the opportunity, and it has been even further catalyzed by what we are seeing on some of the global events like the upcoming World Cup in 2034, Asian Winter Games at Trojena. Let's not forget that in 2028. We are at NEOM House, of course, and we also have Expo 2030 and some global events. In the meantime, of course, we've been busy working on Vision 2030. We are essentially halfway into that vision, more than halfway in. Tremendous progress, and this is the largest and most ambitious national transformation program in the world. And the investment aspect of that is very significant and important. So what Saudi Arabia is doing in terms of encouraging, enabling, and setting the right ecosystem for investments is actually a unique model that has relevance more broadly. So perhaps with that quick intro, and we will go through a number of different topics, I wanted to maybe start with Majid and say, so I mean, you have a long history in investing and in M&A. What are the big shifts and big trends that you're seeing in investing globally, Majid, through your work at NEOM and previously at Aramco Ventures?
Thank you, Han. It's a pleasure to be here. I think some of the major things that are affecting investments, I mean, first one really took place just last night. Yesterday, President Trump was inaugurated into office, and very quickly he signed about 78 different executive orders. Those executive orders have a ripple effect on the investment community and where funding and capital allocation goes. One key example of that is the trades war that's taking place between China and the US, the tariffs. That is going to have a major impact on where traditional manufacturing typically takes place, and how a lot of that is going to be moving out of traditional areas into different parts of the world. So there's a real opportunity for a tectonic shift that is taking place for investments to attract a lot of those manufacturing businesses into their own locations. The Middle East actually provides a great opportunity for that. And so there is an exodus of a lot of businesses, or an expansion of China Plus One, that we're going to see a lot of opportunities that are being grown out of that. Another one of the executive orders that were signed, I think it was the fifth one, was around the United States moving out of the Paris climate change agreement. That basically is shifting the dynamics of investments into sustainable energy and probably going back into conventional energy. So there's going to be an arbitrage of money that went one way for a long time, and now going back into traditional types of conventional energy production. That's going to take capital allocation into different places. So we're seeing indications of that already taking place. I mean, the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which had many banks coming into as part of the climate change initiative, have already walked out and said, we're out of this alliance. And this took place before he was brought into office. So we're seeing indications of where a lot of capital is basically going to move towards. We've seen the advent of AI and what that could do in terms of where technology investments want to go and how that could impact traditional businesses. And I would also say that emerging markets is another area that are posing a great opportunity for investment capital to come into. Case in point, as you mentioned, Saudi Arabia, there was about $1.3 trillion of construction and projects that were launched since Vision 2030 was announced. That is a substantial amount of money. So when we talk about growth opportunities in emerging markets, Saudi Arabia poses one of the best places for that. I think there was $164 billion that were awarded on the back of that. So money is going to follow where the opportunity is, whether it's in technology, whether it's in themes of different investments, whether it is in the friction that is taking place with trade wars. So we're going to see a lot of that dynamic take place over the next few years.
Thanks, Majid. That's really interesting. I did read the transcript of the inaugural speech. I also noted "drill, baby, drill" in the transcript. So I'm sure that people who are looking to invest in energy and energy-related industries are probably looking at that in an interesting way. Fahad, what role does the ministry play in adjusting to some of these economic shifts that we're seeing, and how are you encouraging investment as well?
Well, I think before we talk about specific roles, it's critical to understand where we're at today, where we were at the launch of the vision, and what sort of transcribed or changed globally and regionally since, I would say, pre-2016 up until today. I think if you look at the kingdom pre-2016, it was predominantly relying on oil. Capital productivity was not at the best where we wanted it. Service sectors and non-oil, I would say, economic activity was not at the level that was sustainable for a balanced, I would say, economy. So it was a necessary and a bold move to launch a vision back then that would truly serve as a catalyst to really transform and move the economy towards a more balanced, robust, I would say, and sustainable economy. Now, since then, I think the critical aspect and the key learning that has happened is, which we see being implemented by many different governments, is that pre-2016, across the world, governments were focused on 5-year plans, 4-year plans, 5-year plans. It was slightly sort of attached to, election cycles and then sort of transcribed across different governments or government management sort of systems. Since then, even after the adoption of Vision 2030, we've seen that model being replicated across different jurisdictions and economies to have a more comprehensive plan, to have a plan that is rooted in specific key performance indicators and targets, to make sure that government is not only efficient, but it's also accountable for what it says, what it's announced, and there's a key sort of measurements. Now, what we've done in Saudi is we didn't just launch the Vision 2030. We sort of went on and did a whole, I would say, a plethora of programs that serve as execution programs. So across every different sector, we had housing, quality of life, I would say industrial development and logistics, and even later on, we launched new ones such as financial sector development, human capability, and others. So these served as key catalyst points to one extent, and then we had to sort of dig deeper. So an execution program for our vision realization program can take you only so much. Then you have to sort of develop a deeply rooted strategy where you really look to analyze globally, regionally, and domestically, and seek to sort of identify the challenges, the opportunities, the trends, and carefully sort of craft where you want to be in the future. And we can see that from, let's say, launching the National Investment Strategy, where we said we are going to fix the way we calculate FDI. We're not going to focus on these matrices. We're going to introduce gross fixed capital formation as our key performance indicator. And then we're going to sort of catalyze the investment landscape using sort of two approaches. So there was I would say, a shock therapy approach, and then there was a sort of a more sustained programming to achieve this transformation. Since then, of course, we have sought after and launched a global supply chain resilience initiative to ensure we take benefit and also be well positioned to react to many of the things that Majid mentioned. Now, with all of a sudden a new election in the US, redrafting and crafting its own policy from one end, but you have China on the other end as well, always seeking to adapt. China is no longer looking to be the cheap labor, mass-producing economy. No, China is actually moving away from these traditional industries into more cleaner industries and also more advanced industries. So, in sort of, not to sort of go on and on and on, but I would say that what we've done in the government is we had the catalysts, we developed strategies, and we have a robust governance across every single sector. So we have, away from the Council of Ministers, we have the Council of Economic Development on one end that's separated, that looks at files separately from any sort of political and security aspects or lenses. And then we have also a strategic management committee that looks at how do we connect the strategic point of view with the actual execution itself. And throughout all of these governance and all these, I would say, forums, key discussions and actually targeted discussions can occur that allow decision-making to be not only robust, but to be also comprehensive before it's actually taken. And that's also cascaded across every single strategy. It has its own similar sort of trifecta governance structure.
That's great. Thank you, Fahad. And, we're lucky enough to have a little bit of a broader perspective in terms of across countries. And I have to say, what you're doing at the Ministry of Investment in Saudi Arabia is a lot more dynamic, a lot more involved, a lot more engaging than what we see elsewhere. Tell us about the new national investment law. What's different about it? What's new about it? What are the key provisions?
Well, you can't just look at the investment law as just a law in its own. It comes part and parcel of a series of developments in legislation. So His Royal Highness announced key specific legislations. Most importantly was the civil transactions law. The view about Saudi is, it's hard to do business because everything is based around Sharia, and it's sort of unpredictable, and it's hard to sort of adapt or also have a way to intersect with it, especially when you look at Western sort of case-based legal systems. So the civil transactions law is one of the most comprehensive legislations to be ever drafted in Saudi. I had the privilege and the pleasure to be part of the working team that worked on that piece of legislation. And then you look at that, it actually determines what are civil transactions, what are key definitions that govern a civil society. And then from there, on top of it, you have the corporations law. And then we had a bankruptcy law. So if you look at all of these specific legislations, they're building blocks to ensure that the investment climate and the business climate is conducive to investment and business. Now, the investment law's predecessor was the foreign investment law, which used to govern how foreign investors should and can behave in the economy. That was an old piece of legislation. We had some bylaws that were crafted back then that sort of mandate providing equal treatment, equitable access between foreign investors and local investors. And we said, you know what, it's time to actually bring that to the front in an actual piece of legislation. The investment law states clearly that there is equitable access across different sectors of the economy for foreign and provides that equal treatment with the local investors. It clearly states that you have the right to seek arbitration. We have abolished the licensing regime. So no longer you have to get a license and on top of that you do that. So we tried to sort of simplify the processes and instill key principles in this law that provides equal access, equal treatment, equitable access, and really ensure that foreign investors get the same access as local investors, they get the same treatment, and we bridge the cost gap of doing business between global enterprises and local.
And Fahad, new sectors have been opened up as well, right?
Yes.
So those were closed. So it's not just level playing field, but it's also new sectors that were previously restricted.
So on the sectors, as we are today, the bylaws are being sent out to public consultation. The implementing regulations, not the bylaws. The implementing regulations are being sent out for public consultation. And what happens before is we used to have set of restricted sectors. Some are logical, if you look at defense sectors, many other sectors that have a sort of security angle to it. It's quite sensible to have those restricted and to sort of understand what are you seeking to do in order for us to allow that business. But many others in the past, an example was like brokerage. Brokerage was not allowed back then. We've worked, myself and my team, 3 years ago to remove that restriction from the old law. But now we're flipping the page. Instead of so many restrictions, and you seek to gain an exception, we're trying to limit the amount of restrictions in order to limit the amount of processing for exceptions for that. So you will see, hopefully in the upcoming weeks, a new list come out with a far more liberal approach to many of these sectors, especially the strategic ones, the ones that we are seeking to develop more and more.
Very good, exciting. Majid, just turning to NEOM, and this is a sort of once in a generation project. It's more than a project; it's the size of Belgium, actually. At NEOM Investment Fund, tell us about how you make the compelling case to investors to come in and participate in this huge project.
When we think of what a foreign direct investor is looking for, we start with the basics. People are looking for a growth story, and a growth story that is incredibly ambitious. In fact, it really tests the level of aspirations that people would typically have. What we are trying to build in NEOM and the transformation that's taken place in Saudi Arabia in general is a growth story that has a lot of opportunity for people to come and participate in. That growth story, as mentioned with some of the earlier numbers, NEOM alone is $500 billion of a project. 164 billion was awarded over the past 6 years in projects across not just giga projects like Daraiya, Giddiya, Red Sea, Amala, but even Riyadh is expanding. There is a breadth of opportunities. So across sectors, when we talk about new airlines being developed, new rail being developed, an expansion of urban development within a major metropolitan city like Riyadh, infrastructure projects, both conventional and sustainable. There is a whole host of opportunities for people to come and participate in. And so when you have a growth story, a breadth of opportunities, people are also looking for a few more things. Incentives, and that is coming in through the different programs that the government has launched with MISA in particular around enticing certain businesses in certain sectors to come in. We're looking for subsidies, we're looking for liquidity in a market. And so when people are coming in to invest, they want to make sure that there is additional capital that's there to help support those businesses through. And so SIDFs, the Saudi Industrial Development Fund, NDF, the National Development Fund, and the array of programs that they have under them also hosts a great opportunity for additional capital coming in, supported by government. We've seen how many initiatives the PIF has launched in terms of supporting new sector development. So PIF is an ecosystem developer as a sovereign wealth fund. That gives a lot of comfort for investors to come in to say, there are deep pockets here that are going to also come in, but not necessarily compete. People are looking for country risk and a business environment that is conducive for them to come into. I think there was about 600 different regulatory reforms that took place in Saudi since the launch of Vision 2030. 800, sorry. And Fahad just alluded to some of those. These are all indicators of where a better business environment, where you really want to have a haven to put in capital with a great growth story, stability. And so that at a macro level is quite interesting. When it comes to NEOM, the appetite for technology adoption is immense. And so NEOM is really trying to push the bar and the envelope in terms of what a new urban development would look like in the future, what are new modes of mobility and systems that would be coming in. But what NEOM is offering is an opportunity to trial those technologies in NEOM, to actually put money behind industrializing, scaling, testing, and that gives huge validation to those technologies to be able to turbocharge them into mainstream businesses and services. And so when you think of what NEOM has to offer in terms of at a regional level, or any of the 15 economic sectors that are being developed, each and every one of those opportunities are at the frontier of technology, are at a massive scale, and there is a voracious appetite to really try to bring those technologies and adopt them into a living lab called NEOM.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the way I think of NEOM is we are trying to reimagine the way we work and live. And that's actually quite powerful, and that talks to new technologies and new approaches. To give us a flavor, where are people most interested in terms of investing, specifically sectors, parts of NEOM, themes?
I mean, honestly, we're seeing interest across. We have 15 economic sectors. Each one of them has an incredible aspiration as to what a future world looks like. And so, to use your words, as we reimagine what a future health and well-being looks like for people, we're talking about having a digital twin, we're talking about preventative medicine, we're talking about CRISPR technologies. These are advancements that have a long-term way to go, but the runway is very clear and it only has one direction to go. Energy and long-duration energy storage is an important factor if you really want to have 100% renewable energy, which means there's a lot of energy that's coming in at the nighttime where it's not being generated through solar panels. So not only are you going after an energy mix, you're going after a storage mix, and so a lot of technology is there. And so I would say we're seeing different technologies cutting across all 15 sectors. Some of them early stage, some of them are coming into late stage, and we have to deal with them in terms of how we invest, how we bring them in, what kind of joint development programs we put together with them. But we're seeing interest coming in all the way from China, from Europe, from the US, and now more recently, domestically within Saudi, a lot of entrepreneurial activities are taking place, which is quite encouraging.
That's great, thank you. Fahad, I'm interested in your GCFC, or gross...
FCF.
GFCF, gross fixed capital formation. Is that right? Capital formation, basically.
Gross fixed capital formation.
Right.
It's a mouthful, I know.
Yes, but it's an interesting way of looking at investments. Tell us a little bit about funding mechanisms and incentives and how you are encouraging investments into Saudi Arabia, and also how you're measuring it, if you can go into that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, the whole concept of introducing fixed capital formation as a measurement is typically, if you go Oh, sorry. I thought I was loud enough. Apologies, but for the recording, yeah, sorry. I'll go back again. So the purpose of introducing fixed capital formation as a measurement is typically FDI and many other sort of earlier measurements of investment tend to have a certain bias, tend to have a certain skew, and don't really reflect or give an accurate reflection of what's happening really in the economy in terms of capital formation. We've saw some, like previously in Saudi, we saw a lot of overvaluating in investments by just simply overvaluing existing assets, such as land prices. And that is really not an accurate measure. If I say it's a 50 billion investments and the land is 25 billion, I'm not really investing 50 billion, am I? Because the piece of land that the development is going on top of is not really conducive to economic activity. So that was the primary shift, to really start looking at capital formation and how we're really going to measure investments accurately. So that's why we look to introduce fixed capital formation. How do we measure that? We look actually at the books of companies. It's part of their submission annually to look at taxation, zakat, and all of these elements. So we analyze them to understand how much capital is being actually formed in the economy. So that's on the measurement side. So we have an accurate pulse of how the investments are doing. Now, what are we trying to do overall to sort of catalyze and increase investments? There's two key aspects, and they all and both have to do with de-risking. The most important aspect for investors is how are you going to help me de-risk my investments? You're talking about new sectors, hydrogen, AI, all of that. It's all up in the air, you know. I could have thrown a lot of money in hydrogen and then drill sort of set me back a couple of years. So what's happening here, you know? So that was important. So for many sort of investors to understand how are we really going to de-risk that investment.
Does anyone have maybe a quick question from anyone? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Majid and Fahad. You really put the perspective for investment climate and in Saudi. So my name is Imtiaz Hussain. I'm managing director of an investment bank in London and New York, and I had the Middle East region as well. And I'm CEO of UK GCC Private Capital Alliance. We are an alliance of private equity, sovereign wealth funds, and investment funds. So hence my relevance and being here. And I obviously have conversations with a lot of renewable energy companies. We do a lot of investment banking for these companies, and also a lot of private equity and other investment funds who have an interest, and we are having conversations. So what is it? How you are attracting the foreign capital? Yes, I did a lot of work, especially 800 laws and making changes in the rules and regulations. And what are you doing to attract this capital, especially the private capital?
That's a great question, actually. So when it comes to developing our capital markets, we've actually done extensive studies on that matter. So we've identified where do we actually need most capital to be attracted to. Our debt capital market is still in its infancy, so we're quite focused on improving the debt capital market because, as we said, so there's $3.3 trillion of capital formation targeted. There's over 1.8 trillion of construction spend happening. I think this year specifically, and I'm not going to burn all the numbers because we have a session on construction tomorrow here, we're estimated over 265 will be deployed this year in 2025 for construction. Now, across all of these all of these industries that we're seeking to develop, we need not only debt, so we have to develop the debt capital markets to ensure there's enough sort of capital being circulated across the capital market, but also we're constantly looking to attract asset managers. We're constantly looking to attract financial institutions to launch products within the country itself. What we're doing when we're sitting with financial investors, we're telling them, tell us what's holding you back. Tell us what's your risk, what's your fear in launching these products within the country itself. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we've already started launching our first batch of special economic zones. We have a financial district that will be a special economic zone in Riyadh itself. So there's different tax regimes implemented there. And in addition to everything that we've identified as a challenge, we have a dedicated team in a program called the Financial Sector Development Program. The Ministry of Investment, Ministry of Finance, the Capital Markets Authority, the Central Bank are all working together jointly to really ensure that we are catering to new different financial instruments, potentially on the lower end of the stream or on a more diverse pool of investment. We've seen a big rise in crowdfunding, for example, and we have a very strong program for fintech that we're carefully sort of identifying what types of technologies that we need to really sort of catalyze and launch the financial technology, let's say, industry and ecosystem in the kingdom itself. Now, if you'd like to sort of understand more, I know we have a session, I'll get you the details of the session, dedicated for the banking system and the financial sort of sector to just talk about the findings that we've studied in the number. We are constantly looking at, first of all, looking at how we can help local banks increase their capacity, how we can help international banks that are licensed in the kingdom to do more in the kingdom, and how do we also unlock the offshore lending sort of pipeline from that end. And we're not stopping just on the financial products. We're actively looking at alternative investments and alternative funding for government spending. So we're constantly working on developing a pipeline. I think our purpose is to ensure there's ample opportunities and to ensure that we're quite transparent and we communicate well. And then you guys do your what you do best.
All right. Do you want to add anything, Majid? Or you?
Just to pick up on the last point, which is those opportunities, I think if I had covered the macro level, what we're doing is actually working on developing the opportunities, which is a solar farm, a wind farm, a desalination plant, having those business plans reviewed, making sure that they're bankable, and then putting them to the market, inviting developers, inviting financiers. The green hydrogen project was an $8.6 billion project in itself. 60% of that was project financed. And so it was oversubscribed. So that's an example of what is a great opportunity for people to come into and participate. And we have several of those at scale that we're providing. And so while MISA provides the incentives, the backbones, the macro level, the regulatory reform activity and advocacy on behalf of the business environment, I think where we're coming in is at the opportunity level in particular.
That's great. I think we'll hold it there. Let me just say a big thank you to Fahad and to Majid for your insights. And thanks everyone for joining us this morning. Thank you very much.